this session so that we can refer to this at a later stage. Today's session, we are going to totally focus on something which is called as pivot tables, which is one of the core concepts in MS Excel. Now, can anyone tell me in the chat box, why do you think we use pivot table? Can anyone tell me in the chat box? Why do we use pivot table? Why do we use pivot table? Can anyone tell me in the chat box? Summarize large sums of data. Very good. Yes, to summarize, to obtain concise value, to generate insights from your data, to generate reports, to analyze your data. What else? Yes. Don't we also use it in order to obtain answers from your data? Yes, don't we use it in order to obtain answers from your data? So now in today's session, we are going to talk about pivot table in detail. But before we begin, as to how to create a pivot table, there are certain requirements, or as we call it, prerequisites, which the data should meet. I repeat, there are certain prerequisites which the data should meet so that it can be used in order to create a pivot table. Let us have a look at the requirements. Firstly, the data should have headers for the columns. So the data, if this is the data, it should have column headers or labels. So here we have product main category, we have product, we have year, we have month, revenue, and quantity. These are our labels or headings. The data should have these labels or headings in order to be used for pivot table. Second requirement or second prerequisite which the data should meet in order to be used to create a pivot table. The second requirement that the data should meet is there should be no totals, comma, subtotals in between. There should be no totals and subtotals in between. That means if this is your data, I repeat, if this is your data, in between the data, there should be no like total rows or subtotal rows, those kind of things. So the data should be clean data and there should not be any totals or subtotals in between your data. Okay. Then your data can be used for a pivot. Finally, they should not have any blank rows or columns because it will hamper or it will not give you the authentic results that it needs to give. So no blank rows or no blank columns so that it will not hamper your data. So these are the prerequisites or the requirements that your data should meet so that your data can be used in order to create a pivot table. These are the requirements that your data should meet in order to be used to create a pivot table. Let us go ahead and let us talk about creating a pivot table. Now, when we create a pivot table, okay, why do we do it? We do it to analyze the data. We do it to organize the data, to represent the data in the form of generating insights, correct? I am using the sheet which is called beverages. 1 minute. I am using the sheet which is called beverage data. So if you right mouse click over here, you will see beverage data. My sheet is called beverage data. Okay. Let us go ahead now and let us talk about understanding that when we create a pivot table, we often end up creating a pivot table by dragging and dropping certain items in the row shelf and in the column shelf. Now, when we drag and drop certain items in the row shelf and in the column shelf, what happens very often is it may not accomplish or it may not give us what we are actually looking for. It may not accomplish or it may not give us what we are actually looking for. So, very often we may have certain answers for the data, but the answers to the data may not be. Just one moment. One moment. There is an issue with some participants trying to join the meeting. Okay, I'm really sorry. Actually, some of the participants had not joined in, so I needed to reshare the meeting link. Um, let us continue. So, what I was trying to say is often we create a pivot table and it is not exactly what we are looking for because we have dragged and dropped items in the row shelf and in the column shelf, but they are not necessarily what we are searching for. So, here what I am going to do is I'm going to come to insert. Okay, I'm going to select within the table. I'm going to click inside insert. And inside insert, I have two options. One, I have pivot table. The other one, I have recommended pivot table. Now, what does recommended pivot table? Let me tell you one thing very honestly. If for the next 6 months, you do not use pivot table, if for the next 6 months, you do not use pivot table. You will end up forgetting parts of pivot table. In that scenario, recommended pivot table will really help you, because recommended pivot table will give you a pivot table based on analysis of your data by Excel. So it may not be a foolproof solution to your problem. So have a look at this. It is giving me sum of revenue product wise. It is giving me sum of revenue by product main category. Okay. And the years. Sum of quantity by product. Okay. Then I have sum of revenue by month. So these are presets. These are presets which can be used. These are presets which can be used. You can click on this. It will create the pivot table. And then within this, you can make minor modifications. And then you can make minor modifications within this data. Okay. You can then make minor modifications after this has been created. So click on OK. And here you will see a pivot table. Is it clear, everyone? So here you can make minor modifications and it will be good to go. So what you can do over here is, in this scenario, yes, in this scenario, everyone please be on mute. Everyone please be on mute. Yes. Okay. Now over here, you will see products, you will see the month, and you will see the revenue. Now suppose you want to convert, instead of revenue, you want quantity. So what will I do? Remove revenue from here and add quantity. So like this, you can make minor modifications to the recommended pivot table. So the advantage or the important factor of having a recommended pivot table is you can have minor modifications done. Let us go ahead. But today we are going to use this beverage data and we are going to create a pivot table from scratch. I repeat, we are going to use this beverage data and we are going to create a pivot table right from scratch. Firstly, if your data is in table or your data is in a range of cells, you can use it to create a pivot table. If your data is in table format or it is in a range of cells, in either case, you can convert it into a pivot table. But if your data is in table format, the advantage here is that when new entries are added, it will auto update itself. When new entries are added, it will auto update itself and your table will automatically increase in size. I repeat, your table will automatically increase in size. Right? Any questions? Any questions? Are we good? Okay. Let us go ahead now and let us come and let us understand how to create the pivot table from a table. Once your pivot table, once your data is ready, that means either it is in table format or it is in a range of cells, we will go to the Insert tab and under Insert, go to the first option here which says from a table or a range, which says from a table or a range. You can either use data which is in range cells or in table format to create a pivot table. See this pop-up which opens up. Okay, I'll have a look at your screen, so just give me a moment. Select a table or a range. So under table or a range, it is beverage data, the table which is taken into consideration. I want to request all the participants to please be on mute, everyone, because the session is also being recorded simultaneously, you know. Yeah. Select a table or a range of cells. So this is the table or the range of cells, which is beverage data. Choose where you want the pivot table to be placed. Now you can select where you would like your pivot table to be placed. You can select where you would like your pivot table to be placed. So either you can choose a new worksheet, which according to me is the best option, or you can choose an existing worksheet. When you choose a new worksheet, you will get a new blank sheet where your pivot table can be placed on. I repeat, you will get a new blank sheet where your pivot table can be placed on. But if you choose existing worksheet, I repeat, but if you choose existing worksheet, your pivot table will be placed on this worksheet only. So if you choose existing worksheet, your pivot table will be placed on this beverage data sheet only. Okay, it will be placed here only, but you need to specify the location. That means from this cell onwards, there is empty space, so the pivot table can be placed here. But if you choose new worksheet, you can go to new worksheet. It will add a new worksheet and you can have your pivot table placed over there. Click on OK. And now you will have a new worksheet called Sheet 2 added or Sheet 4 added. And here you have your pivot table fields. And here you have your pivot table report can be built over here. Please be on mute, everyone. Everyone on mute, please. Request. Okay. So here you have your pivot table report, which can be built. And here you have your pivot table fields. Here you have your pivot table fields. And here you have your pivot table placeholders. Now what we need to do is we need to understand what does row stand for, what does column stand for, and what does value stand for. Let us begin with rows. Rows and columns are for labels. So your labels of your rows and columns like your category, your subcategory, your product names, category, subcategory, product names, region, branch, location, customer name. Then you can have ship mode. Then you can have class. You can have marketing manager name or manager name, team leader name, or probably it could be a client name. All of these things can be in rows and columns. So basically, items which are text in nature, or as we call them as string data type, as we call them as string data type, they are the ones which you will find in the row and the column shelf. Okay, so what we are going to do over here is I'm going to take something which is called as the product and I'm going to drag and drop it and put it in the row shelf. When I drag and drop product in the row shelf, you will see product over here. And then I'm going to take a revenue and I'm going to drag and drop revenue in the value shelf. And I have the revenue in the value shelf. Now here I have the names of the products and I have the sum of the revenue. Now, though apple juice is appearing just once in this pivot table, it is a concise value. It is a concise value. So, if I double click on this, it will give me the items which have made up this value. It will give me the items which have made up this value. Can you all try this much? And Amar sir, would you like to share your screen? You can share your screen. Amar sir, I'll just give you access. Share screen. Yes, you can share your screen so I can show you the option. Okay, you managed to create a pivot table. Which option were you not seeing, sir? Go back to beverage data. Oh, you are not getting the drop down. Okay, what version of Excel is yours, sir? Or maybe because mine is Office 365, I'm getting that option. Go to insert. I'll tell you. Go to insert. You're still getting the same thing. So more or less you're getting everything. So it should not be an issue. Yeah, I think it's fine. You can stop sharing. Okay, everyone. If everyone has completed this much, let me know in the chat box and then we can proceed. So here at the moment, I can see the sum of the revenue. But if instead of the sum of the revenue, I would like to see the average revenue, I will double click on sum of revenue and choose average from summarize field by. So when I double click on sum of revenue, the value field settings pop-up opens up. And here under summarize value field by, I will choose average and click on OK. In this manner now, I can have the average value shown to me. Can everyone try this and let me know in chat box? Has everyone completed this? Okay. Now, if I want to remove the average and I'm going to drag the quantity here. and I'm going to drag the quantity twice. Why did I drag the quantity twice? Because once I want the sum of the quantity. But the second time I'm going to double click on sum of quantity, and next to summarize value by, I have something which says show value as. Next to summarize value by, I have something which says show value as. Click on show value as. Under the drop down, click on percentage of grand total and click on OK. I can always go and rename this as percentage of total and click outside. So in this way, in one column, I have the sum of the quantities, and in the next column, I have the percentage of total. Can you try this, everyone, please? So how do you get percentage of total? Double click on the value, and instead of summarize value by, do a show value as. Yes, sure. I'm removing the percentage of total, and let me drag and drop the revenue in the value sheet. Let me drag and drop the revenue in the value sheet. Under sum of revenue, I'm going to come here and I'm going to double click. And here I will click on show value as. Under the drop down, I will choose percentage of grand total. So normally we use summarize value by, and you have sum, count, average, and those kind of values. But when I click on show value as, you get these values where you can represent it in percentage format. So percentage of grand total and say OK. And here you can have percentage based values of the grand total. When you are changing this value, you can come here and you can rename from here as well. You can rename from here as well. Alternatively, you can come here to the formulae bar and you can rename from here as well. Yeah. Yes, in most cases, all of these are already fed in recommended pivot table format in Excel. That is true. But recommended pivot table is like a quick fix. I would call it like a premix where you only add hot water and your meal gets cooked. But if you are looking for something more customized, something more niche, something where you have full control of what you want to represent and how you want to represent, and grouping as well, then you would need to go in for this kind of pivot table. But yes, if you feel that the options available under recommended pivot table, they suit your requirement and they meet your needs, you can go ahead with using that. No worries. Once you all are done, let me know, then I can go ahead. Okay, great. Now what we are going to do over here is, suppose I want to take my product main category as well. If I want to take my product main category and I put it under my product, see what happens. Is this looking proper? So don't you think the main category should be on top and the subcategory should be under it? So that is why I may need to click on this and I may need to say move up. When I click on move up, it will automatically send the main category on top and the product below it. I repeat, if I say move up, it will automatically send the main category on top and the product down. Also, when I move it up, you will see this minus sign next to beverages and this minus sign next to snacks. When I click on the minus sign next to beverages, it will collapse. When I click on the plus sign, it will expand it. When I click on the minus sign next to snacks, it will collapse it. When I click on the plus sign next to snacks, it will expand it. In this manner, I can expand and collapse the items of the product name category and the product subcategory. Can you all please try this? Perfect. How do you clear out your pivot table? Simply by dragging out the items, or the other option is uncheck from the checkbox. Now suppose over here, I want to add the product main category in the row shelf, and I add the product in the column shelf, and I add the quantity in the value. Do you think this table looks good? Or do you think this table looks good? Will you go for option A or will you go for option B? Is this better or is this better? Let me know in the chat box. Is product better in column shelf? Is product better in row shelf? Quickly in the chat box. Is the product better in the row shelf or is the product better in the column shelf? What do you all have to say about it? Row shelf. Absolutely right. Who else? Okay, let me give you the answer why the product is better in the row shelf. Now, when we are reading news, when we are reading blogs, when we are referring to information on the internet, either on our tablets or smartphones or iPads, you will notice that we hold the gadget in our hand like this and we scroll in this direction, either up to down or down to up. That shows that mentally we are conditioned to reading data in vertical format. And that is why the same rule goes for a pivot table also, whereby when the data is represented in vertical format, it is easier to read data in a pivot table when the data is in vertical format as opposed to when the data is in horizontal format. So a longer pivot table is better as opposed to a wider one because people do not like to scroll. So sorry, I will just repeat. So basically what happens is when we are using a smartphone or a tablet and we are referring to data, we scroll in this direction, correct? That is the way in which our mind is conditioned to read data. And that is why a longer pivot table is better than a wider one. Let me do one thing. I'll take a copy of this table. Okay. I've taken a copy of this pivot table. And here what I will do, I'll put product here. Now look at the two tables. Tell me now, is table A looking better or is table B looking better? In table A, in the row shelf, you have both items, product main category and the product name. And in table B, in product main category is in row shelf, whereas product name is in column shelf. Yes. So table A is easier to read than table B because we are conditioned to read data in vertical format. That is why a longer table is always favored as opposed to a wider table. So that is why people prefer a longer table than a wider table when we talk about pivot tables. Now, since I copy pasted both the tables on the same page, It will also answer another question of yours, which will say, can we have two pivot tables on the same sheet? Yes, we can have two pivot tables on the same sheet. However, when I click on one pivot table and you see your pivot table field list, okay, when I click on a pivot table and you see the field list for the pivot table, this pivot table has this field list and this pivot table has this field list. So whichever pivot table is the active pivot table or you have your selected cell in that, that field list will help you to make changes in that pivot table. So if I am on table A, in pivot table fields, you will see data or you will see row and column shells or value shells related to table A. While when I have clicked on table B, you will see pivot table fields, row and column shells and value shells relevant to pivot table B. Is it clear, everyone? Any questions so far? Can you all try copy pasting your pivot table? Okay. James, are you able to follow now? Or in case you have not followed something, let me know. I will repeat it for you. You have followed now. Okay, super. Just copy paste the pivot table and try it out, everyone, before we go ahead. Let me know when you'll complete in the chat box. Perfect. Everyone has completed and everyone has followed how to use two pivot tables on the same sheet. Now let me ask you a question. Suppose you want to filter the data based on product name category. What will you do? You will click over here, click on the drop down, and when the field selected here is product name category, you can click here and you can filter based on product name category. Come to the drop down here, clear filter, and the filter has been removed from the product name category. Come back here, select the drop down, choose product, and from here, if you uncheck the items here and click on OK, here you can filter based on product, subcategory, or the product names. So basically, when you click here, you can first select the field based on what you want to filter, and then you can filter the data. How do you clear the data or the filter? You click on the field again, click on clear filter from product. It will enable you to remove the filter from the product, and here you have your entire data. Now, since product and product name category were already a part of the pivot table, I could filter from here. But suppose I want to filter based on month or year. If you look carefully at the data, month and year is neither in the row shelf nor in the column shelf. I repeat, the year and the month is neither in the row shelf nor in the column shelf. If you want to filter based on an item which is neither in the row shelf nor in the column shelf, then what we do is we take the item and we drag and drop it in the filter shelf. Can you see this filter shelf? We've not yet spoken about it. When you want to filter based on an item which is neither there in row shelf or in column shelf, then we use the filter shelf in order to filter based on this category. Click on the drop down here, click on January, and you're only seeing data for January month. If you want to see data for January, February, and March, 3 months, click on this select multiple option. Click on select multiple option, and then from the checkbox, you enable the 3 months. Click on OK, and here you have your data for January, February, and March. Can you all try this, everyone, using the filter shelf? So first, I want you all to try and filter with items which are already there in the column shelf. Then I want you to explore the filter shelf for items which are not a part of the pivot table. Please try this, everyone. And in case you all have not followed anything, let me know. I will repeat. Why we cannot drag month and year in the same filter box. You can drag month in here. You can drag month in here. You just have to click on it and you just have to drag it. You only have to click on it and drag it in the box. You want to share your screen? Did it work for you? Hassan sir, would you like to share your screen? Okay, so it's working for you, right? Okay, super. Has everyone else completed? Has everyone else completed? Okay, so let us wind up the whole thing. In row and column shelf, we put items which are labels. I repeat, in row and column shelf, we put items which are labels. Labels as in text-based items like category, subcategory, region, location, customer ID, customer name, product name, zone, marketing manager name, team leader name, ship mode. All of these items would be in the row or the column shelf. Ideally speaking, the item which has more subdivisions in it, always put it in the row shelf because, as I said, we read data vertically and a longer table is always better than a wider table. That is the first thing. Secondly, in value shelf, since the kind of calculations available are sum, minimum, maximum, average, count, and a percentage of the total, in the value shelf, you'll put items which are numeric in nature. So in the value shelf, we will put things like quantity, profit, sales, salary, estimate, actual. All of these things will be in the value shelf. So what will be in the value shelf? Quantity, profit, sales, discount, salary, estimate, actual. So basically values which are numeric in nature will be found in the value shelf. Now let us go and speak about filter shelf. Now we do not use the filter shelf unless we need to filter the data. I repeat, we do not need to use the filter shelf unless we need to filter the data based on an item which is neither in the row shelf or in the column. So as we see this example over here, in the row labels, we have product name category and we have product. So because we have product name category and product in the column shelf, and we want to filter based on month, and month is neither in the row shelf nor in the column shelf, we will take the month and put it in the filter shelf. So the filter shelf is only used when we want to filter the data based on a category which is neither in the row shelf nor in the column shelf. So if we want to filter the data based on an item which is not there in the row shelf, neither it is there in the column shelf, then we use the filter shelf. Is it clear, everyone? Any questions so far? How do you clear the pivot table? You simply drag your items out of the pivot table and you clear your pivot table. Now what we are going to do is, now I'm going to show you how to add a slicer, which is also called as a visual filter, to visually you filter your pivot table. So here I'm going to take my product name category. Under the product name category, I'm going to take my months. Under the months, I'm going to take in the value shelf the revenue. Now, can you see I'm seeing a filtered version of my data? In order to clear this filter, can you see this drop down here? I will click on months because the filter is applied on months. And I will say clear filter from months to clear the filter from the months. So now you can see the different months and the revenue. So these are all the months and these are the revenue in the two main categories, that is beverage and snacks. Beverage and snacks. Now let us go further, and under pivot table analyze, I am going to insert something which is called as a slicer. A slicer is nothing but a visual filter which enables you to visually filter your data. So click on insert slicer and you can choose the column label on which you would like to insert the slicer. I repeat, you can use the column label on which you would like to insert the slicer. Suppose I would like to insert the slicer on year or on product. So for now, I'm inserting on product. I'm going to click on OK. And here I get this button-based slicer or visual filter for my data. Now here, the entire slicer has a scroll bar and all of the data is in a single column. Also, you will see there is a slicer tab which appears here in front of you, and these are the slicer related settings. Firstly, what I can do here is I can increase the number of columns for my slicer. So from buttons, from one column, I've added two more columns and made it a 3-column slicer. If I want a 4-column slicer, I can have a 4-column slicer. If I would like to increase the height of my buttons in my slicer, under buttons, under height, I will increase the height. If I want to increase the width of my buttons, I will increase the width of my buttons. Reduce the size of the slicer like you would do to an object in PowerPoint. And now let us see how the slicer works. When I click on apple juice, you will see only data related to apple juice appearing in the adjacent pivot table. When I click on chips, you will see only chips related data. However, when I click on apple juice and I hold down Control key and I click on orange juice, I can see data for apple juice and orange juice. So when I want to multi-select, I will use Control key on the keyboard. Can you try inserting the slicer before I go ahead? How do you clear a slicer? You come to the corner here and you clear. Now the clear slicer option is only available when a slicer is applied. If no slicer is applied, you will not get the clear slicer option. Have you all completed this much, everyone? James, have you completed? Amar, have you completed? Let me know in the chat box if anyone has any doubts or if they want me to repeat. Otherwise, we will go ahead with the other options in the slicer tab. Yes, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so suppose you want to click on apple juice, okay, as the slicer. Then you want to click on orange juice and water. So I will hold down control key and click on orange juice, water, and I decide to include Coke as well. So I click on Coke. Now, since these items were not one after the other, I repeat, since these items were not one after the other, or in short, they were not adjacent in nature, because of that, I needed to hold down the control key. But clear the slicer. If I want to select everything from apple juice till fruits, these are adjacent items. So I'll click on apple juice, then I will hold down the shift key and then click on fruits. It will include everything in the whole row. So when I want all selected along the way, like one after the other, I will use shift key. If I want all selected along the way, then I will use the shift key. Is it clear, everyone? If I want all the way, everything selected, I will use the shift. Use the clear option to clear the filter. Now your slicer is a visual filter. It visually filters your data. But sometimes we may apply the slicer and then by mistake delete it from the keyboard. Okay? We may apply the slicer and then we may delete it from the keyboard. If in that case, the slicer or the filter does not get cleared from the data, in that case, you can come to product here. Can you see this? Next to product, you'll see the filter icon. Why? Because we had applied the slicer on product. From this drop down here, you will clear filter from product. Why am I doing this? Because I applied the slicer on product. I forgot to clear the slicer from the product. I deleted it. So the filter is still currently running. I am only seeing apple juice related data. So I will say clear filter from product. And now the filter has been cleared from the product. Is it clear, everyone? So if by mistake you apply a slicer, you don't clear it, and then you remember that you need to clear it, you can always go to the item in the field list and click on the drop down and clear the filter. Also, when we are applying slicers, okay, we can do a lot of coloring also to the slicer. So what do I mean by coloring? We can choose different colors of presets from the slicer style depending upon how our data looks. Okay. We have the name of the slicer, which is the slicer caption. If you want to change this to product names, you can change it. It will give you the name, product names. Okay. You can again go into slicer, and if you wish to change the height and width of your slicer, there are two ways of doing it. One, you can manually pull the slicer. Two, you can change the height and width from here. Can you see this? You can manually change the height and the width from here. So in this way, you can work with your slicer. Any questions? Please try this. Height and width of slicer, changing the color of the slicer. Please be on mute, everyone. Please be on mute, everyone. Once you're complete, let me know in the chat box, please. Has everyone completed slicer? Yes? Okay, super. Thank you. Now, as I showed you earlier, when you come to the corner of this beverage, since there are more items below beverage, when I click on this minus sign, it will collapse beverage. Okay. And I click on the minus sign, it will collapse snacks. And it will show me subtotals between the values. So this is my grand total, but these are subtotals of beverages and snacks. Now, if I click over here and I go to pivot table analyze, I can click here on this minus sign in order to collapse and the plus sign to expand. The plus sign will expand all instances, whereas the minus sign will collapse all instances. So, if you want to collapse everything or expand everything, you can use expand field. To collapse everything at one go, you can use collapse. But suppose I only want to expand beverages, I will click here and I will see the data for beverages. Collapse and I will collapse. So if you want to see individual items in detail, you can click on expand or collapse. And if you want to collapse everything together, you can use collapse and expand from here. For individual items, you have to manually do the expand and the collapse. But if you want to do global changes or you want to expand and collapse everything, then you can use this plus sign and this minus sign to expand or collapse everything at one go. Please try this expand and collapse item. But in order for this item to work, you have to have two items in the row shelf. So you can have either product and product name category. You can either have year and month. So year on top and month below it. Or you can have product name category and month under it. So basically, the item in the row shelf should be nested in order for it to be collapsible. Please try. Okay, super. let us go ahead, and I am removing the item from the row shelf and the column shelf. Now, in order to go ahead with more details with pivot table, we will be going to the data set which is called as sample superstore. In order to go to the data set called sample superstore, right click over here. So you have these two arrows which help you navigate between sheets. Right click over here and click on sample superstore. Can you see under insurance data you have sample superstore? Under insurance data you have something which is called as sample superstore. Click on this, click on OK, and here you have your data, and here you have your data. So this is the data which we are going to use in order to create more permutations and combinations with the pivot table. Has everyone managed to locate sample superstore? Everyone? Have you all managed to locate sample superstore data? Yes? Has everyone managed to locate sample superstore data? Okay, great. So let's do a control A over here, a control A over here to select the whole data. Okay. After doing a control A, let us go to insert and click on pivot table. You get the pivot table pop-up which comes up, which says pivot table from table or a range. At the moment, can anyone quickly tell me in the chat box, is it a range of cells? Is it a table? Very, very quickly. Is it a table? Is it a range? No, it is not a table. It is a range of cells. Yes. How do we know it is a range of cells? Because you are getting the name of the sheet and the reference of the cells. If it was a table, you would get the table name here. Okay. So it is a range of cells. Choose where you want the pivot table to be placed. I'm going to click on new worksheet because I want the pivot table to be placed on a new worksheet. Suppose you have a requirement where you want the pivot table to be placed on the same worksheet. Then you will have to look for space on this worksheet from where onwards you can place it. So you can choose existing worksheet, but then you have to navigate and choose the place. So click on new worksheet, click on OK, and here you have the pivot table worksheet space. So here on the pivot table fields, you have the column headers. What column headers are these? These are nothing but the labels. I repeat, these are nothing but the labels for your data. These are nothing but the labels for your data. So these are the headers. So if you see your column headers, these are the same. They are used in your field list. They are used in your field list. Here is your pivot table placeholder, and here you have your drag fields area. Now, if you want to create a pivot table, I repeat, if you want to create a pivot table, what do you have to do? You have to take an item and put it in the row shelf, take a number value and put it in the value shelf, and you will get a pivot table. So let us understand this data first. So here I will take category. Under category, what will you have? Subcategory. And I will take the sales value in the value field shelf. So what do I have over here? I have the sales values and I have my row labels. In my row labels, I have furniture, which is the main category. And under that, I have the subcategory. This is collapsible again. Now, suppose I remove my category and my subcategory from here. And instead of that, let me take my segment and under segment I'm going to take city. So these are my cities. They are a lot. So I don't think it's a very good idea. Let me try state. Let me check the data for state. It is not that bad. So, okay, I'm going to take segment, and under segment, I'm going to take state. Now, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to show you slicer one more time here. But this time, I'm going to show you a two-level slicer. So, first, we will add a slicer for category, and we will also add a slicer for subcategory. I want to explain to you that when we apply more than one slicer, I repeat, when we apply more than one slicer, the slicer works in tandem or in sync. That means one slicer becomes your main slicer and the other slicer becomes the sub slicer or the dependent slicer. So basically, if I make changes to my main slicer, only those items which are relevant will be appearing for my sub-slicer. So click on Insert Slicer. And here I'm going to scroll down and insert a slicer for category. And I will click on subcategory and I'm going to insert a slicer. So here, as you can see, I have a slicer for category and I have a slicer for subcategory. Increase the size of the slicer of subcategory and increase the columns. Reduce the size a little, make the buttons. Now this is what I'm trying to explain. When I click on furniture category, only those subcategories relevant to furniture will appear. When I click on office supplies, only items in subcategory relevant to office supplies will be available for me. Alternatively, if I click on technology, only the subcategories relevant to technology will appear in subcategories. So basically, when you apply multiple slicers, the slicers work in tandem or in sync. Similarly, if you have regions, if you choose a particular region, only the branches which are relevant to that region will be active for you. So let me clear this slicer and now I see all the data. Suppose I click on furniture, hold down control and click on office supplies. Now since I've chosen two items in category, subcategories relevant to those items in category are available for you. Clear the category slicer, apply on technology and you'll see technology related data available. And clear it. Can you all please try this, everyone? Can you all please try this multi-level slicer? Okay, great. Now next to slicer, next to slicer, we have something which is called as the timeline filter. The timeline is called as a time series slicer or a timeline filter. So when you have data in time series or when you have data in dates, you can use the timeline slicer to filter your data. So if your data is in years, months or days, you can filter it using the timeline slicer. That is why when I click on the timeline slicer, only items, I repeat, when I click on the timeline slicer, only items which are relevant to it will appear in front of me. Only items which are relevant to it will appear in front of me. Since it is a timeline slicer, you will see two types of time series data which are appearing in front of me. One is the order date, the other is ship date. When I click on order date, I will get a timeline slicer with the order dates. And then I can use the slicer or the slider in the timeline slicer to filter out time series data. Click on OK. Yes, sure. So basically, when you are on the pivot table, you have the pivot table analyze tool which appears here. Click on that, and next to insert slicer, you will see insert timeline. Insert timeline will enable you to filter out time series data. Insert timeline will enable you to filter out time series data. Click on insert timeline, click on order date, and click on OK. And now you have your timeline slicer. Now, let me tell you one of the major drawbacks of the timeline slicer. Now, in the normal slicer which you applied, you could select non-adjacent items, like you could take 2 items from here, you could take 2 categories from here, 2 subcategories from here. But in time, you can only take time along the same path. So, for example, if I am seeing from October to December for 2018, I cannot press control. I repeat, I cannot press control and then go and take this data also. I lose the earlier data. Can you see this? So when you apply a timeline slicer, you can only select one type of time. So here, at the moment, I have taken time which I have selected, or I have applied a filter to only show me data from November 2016 to February 2017. This is my scroll bar, so I can scroll through the data. And while scrolling, this blue area shows the area which is selected. When you apply a timeline slicer, you will see a new tab called timeline which appears in front of you. When you apply a timeline filter, you will see a new tab called timeline which appears in front of you. Now, when you apply the timeline filter or the timeline slicer as we call it, you will get this entire timeline related tab. It will only show when the timeline is selected. So when I go out and click, you will not see. But when I click on it, you will see timeline and you can see your timeline slicer. The timeline slicer, I repeat, will only be active or will only be available when you click on it. When you click on it, you will get the options available. You can go into time styles and you can choose a different color combination based on your choice. You can also reduce or increase the size of your timeline slicer. If you want to clear it like you clear a filter, either you can click here or you can use the keyboard shortcut Alt-C. This keyboard shortcut Alt-C will only be active. I repeat, this keyboard shortcut Alt-C will only be active when your timeline slicer is selected. So only when you have applied a filter and you are on the timeline slicer will Alt-C work. So the slicer should be selected, then only Alt-C will work. If you want to clear it, but you have not selected and you do an Alt-C, for example, it will not clear. So Alt-C to clear it will only work when it is selected or active, whatever you may refer to it as. Yes, sure, I will definitely work out something. So clear it over here, clear the slicer. Let us go ahead. Now, you can change the color of your slicer, as I said. You can also change the name of your slicer, which is also called as a timeline caption. So you can come over here, okay, and you can give a different name to your slicer. You can come over here and you can give a different name to your slicer. Let us understand the show aspect of your timeline slicer. If you want to hide the header, you can hide the header. But then you will not know what is the time series data that you're filtering. So I would not suggest hiding the header. Then we have something which is called as selection label. In selection label, what we can do is we can select, we can see the selected area. So for example, if I've applied a slicer where I've taken October 2016 to February 2017, I know that because of the selection label. If I close the selection label, I am dependent on the slicer to manually look and understand which is the area that is selected. This selection label gives me a quick glimpse. It gives me a quick preview of the area that has been chosen for selection. We also have something which is called as time level. This is your time level, which shows you whether you would like to see the data month-wise, whether you would like to see the data year-wise, or whether you would like to see the data quarter-wise. At the moment, we are seeing the data month-wise. I personally like the idea of seeing the data month-wise because when you see the data month-wise, you have the option of years which come on top of the months. So you have the months here, you have the years on top of it. So if I click on years, I will only see the entire year. If I click on quarter, you will see the entire quarter. Now the quarter in Excel starts from the year January. So if you or your organization are seeing quarter based with beginning in Jan, then this will work for you. But if you are seeing quarter, okay, if you are seeing quarter with 31st March as year ending, okay, then you cannot be dependent on the quarters of Excel. You will need to manually redefine it when you're creating groups. Okay. But if you are seeing quarters from January 1st, this will work for you. So generally, I like to see it either year-wise or month-wise. However, there could be a possibility where you have only data of 3 months. Then you can also see the data day-wise. If you have only 3 months or 6 months data, then you can see the data day-wise or month-wise. Either case, it will work for you. I hope you have understood how to use the timeline slicer options. Just one last option in case of timeline slicer, which is this scroll bar. Sometimes when timeline filter or timeline slicer is used, people feel that it is occupying too much space and they don't want the scroll bar. So they end up unchecking the scroll bar in order to reduce the size of the timeline slicer to use it in a dashboard. In such cases, these arrow keys at the sides will help you to move around the data. These arrow keys will help you to move around your data. Can you all try this, everyone, please, before we go ahead? Once you are done, you can clear the slicer or the timeline filter. And then I will go into the design aspects of the pivot table. This sample superstore data is very useful because it has over 9,000 rows of data. So if you all want to practice pivot table, you all can use this data to practice. Alternatively, since the next session is on Thursday, if you all practice on your real-time data also and have any doubts, you all can share screen and we can discuss your queries before next session begins. Has everyone completed? Can we go to the design aspect of pivot table, please? Has everyone completed this much? Let me know in chat box. Okay, good work. Thank you. Now let us go to the design aspect of the pivot table. Now when your pivot table is selected, you have the design tab which opens next to pivot table analyze. Pivot table analyze enables you to analyze your pivot table, but the design aspect enables you to give formatting to your pivot table to help you keep your pivot table in a more concise manner, to help you to present your pivot table in the form of a pivot report. Firstly, let us start with pivot table styles. So under design, you have pivot table styles and you can choose different kinds of pivot table styles. The next thing which we can do along with the style is we can ask for banded rows. Can you see the banded rows? And we can ask for banded columns. We can also ask for column headers to be bold and row headers. So row headers are our subdivisions based on the color that we have used. These are the basic styling options. Let us go to the layout related options. Now, pivot table by nature and by name is a space saving tool. I would call it concise. I would call it short. I would call it precise and using very less space. Pivot table is very concise. It uses very less space. And that is why it tries to give you reporting in the most nested and the condensed manner. Now here what we will see is you have the data for consumers. You have the data for consumers in this particular column. Let me do one thing. Let me remove state and put a shorter item here. Yes. I've put a shorter item here so it's easier for me to explain. So here you have the data for first class, second class and standard class belonging to consumer. I have the data for first class, same day, second class and standard class belonging to the label consumer. The total of this subdivision is given here. So the total of all this is given in this yellow cell. Now by nature, we are used to reading totals at the end of the data, correct? We are used to reading totals or subtotals at the end of the data. But since pivot table is a concise tool, a compact tool, it had a row over here going empty. And that is why by design, the subtotal was placed at the top of the group by default. So under subtotals, by default, pivot table always shows subtotals at the top of the group. I repeat, by default, pivot table shows subtotals at the top of the group. If you are used to reading data where the total is shown at the bottom of the group, then you can choose this option which says show subtotals at the bottom of the group. Can you see what happened? Now this full total is being shown here and this full total is being shown here and this big total is being shown here. So here you have these totals shown at the top of the group. Is it clear? Let me show you one more time. Go to pivot table design. Under subtotals, show subtotals at the bottom of the group. If I say do not show subtotals, it will remove the subtotal. So you will see there is no subtotals. If I come back to design and I say show subtotals at the top of the group, this is how it gives me by default. So subtotals at the top of the group is default setting. Is it clear? Come back to design, go back to subtotals and say at the bottom of it. Can you all try this much before I go ahead? Okay, great. Now, next to subtotals, we have something which is called as grand total. This is your grand total. I'm going to highlight it in orange for you to see it with a red text. This is your grand total. Grand total is nothing but the total which comes at the end of your column. You have column grand total and you also have row grand total. If I take an item like, for example, category in the column shelf, you will also have row grand total and you will have column grand total. So you will have one row of grand total here. You will have one column of grand total here. So if you want row and column grand totals, you can let them be on. If you would like to turn them off, you can turn off your grand totals. Grand totals are nothing but the totals which are given at the end of your data. So if you would like to see grand totals, you can leave the grand totals on. By default, you do get grand totals, But if you need to turn the grand totals off for any particular reason, you can put off the grand totals from here. Then let us go to the next tab, which is called as the report layout tab. Now, as I told you, by default, pivot table is a space saving tool. It's a concise tool. It takes minimum space. That is why if you see under consumer, you have first class, same day, second class, standard class. They are not given in two separate columns. In fact, if I want to filter also, I will click here, choose the field from here, and when the field is selected, I will get those filtering options available. Under report layout over here, by default, pivot table is always given in compact form. By default, pivot table is given in compact form. By compact form, subtotal is at the top of the group. But if under report layout, I choose outline view, I will get an additional column for the segments. Can you see what happened? So now segment is in this column. Ship mode is in this column. I have got an additional segment column which is given to me as opposed to the earlier compact view. If I go to design, report layout, tabular view also gives me an additional column for consumer but highlighted in a table format with formatting. So if you are looking at an additional column for your items which are in the row shelf which are nested, you can either go for outline view or tabular. Now, if you see over here, consumer has these subdivisions, corporate has these subdivisions, and home office has these subdivisions. Now, it is understood it is consumer first class, consumer same day, consumer second class. But if you would like this item label of consumer to be repeated, I repeat, if you would like this item of consumer to be repeated, you can come into design and under report layout view, you can click on repeat all item labels. What will repeat all item labels do? Repeat all item labels will give you labels repeated for all the items which is there in this particular column. Now, if you don't want it, you don't have to manually go and delete it. No. What do you have to do? Go back to report layout and choose this last option here, which says do not repeat item labels. What will happen? Your item labels will now be removed. Can you try this, everyone, please? If anyone wants anything to be repeated, let me know. Otherwise, you can try this out, please. Report layout and grand total. Okay, great. Now let us go to the last part here in the design tool, which is called as blank row. Now, sometimes your pivot table looks too cluttered with information. There are so many numbers, there is so much of data that there is no breathing space within your pivot table. And even you as a person struggle to read the data. In such a scenario, you can use the option of blank rows, where you can insert a blank line after each item. This will insert a blank line after each item and help to give you a little bit of breathing space, a little bit of room between your numbers and data. If you feel after inserting the blank line that you did not need the blank line or you would like to remove the blank line, you can always go back to design and under blank rows, you can say remove blank line after each item. When you click on remove blank line after each item, it will remove the blank line after the item and it will give you the data as it was earlier. Please try this, everyone. Can we go ahead, everyone? Yes, everyone done? Okay, thank you. Now, in the filter shelf, as you can see, at the moment, there is no item. But suppose I decide and I decide and I put my region in the filter shelf. Now, when I click on the drop down, I will see that I have four regions: Central, East, South, and West. Now, when I go to pivot table analyze, you can see pivot table name and the pivot table has a name. Now, a very good practice would be to name this pivot table based on the data that you have created on this. So, this is segment-wise analysis. Click outside and this is your data, pivot table, segment-wise analysis. Okay. Now, why does this help you? This helps you because later on, when you use these pivot tables to create dashboards, what will happen is these pivot tables, if they are named properly, you will be in a better position to establish a connection between the dashboards for your pivot table using your pivot table. Below pivot table name, you will see options. Now, under this, you have something which is called as show report filter pages. Now, what does show report filter pages do? The item which you took in the filter shelf, when you click on show report filter pages, pivot table will generate individual page reports of the item that you dragged and dropped in your filter shelf. I repeat, pivot table will generate individual page reports of the item that you dragged and dropped in your filter shelf. So click on show report filter pages, click on region OK, and here you will see that based on the name of the region, individual page reports. So here you have a page for Central, here you have a page for East, here you have a page for South, you have a page for West. So for each of them, individual pivot reports have been generated with filtered versions of the data using the filter shell. So this is also a very interesting tool called Show Report Filter Pages under your pivot table. But just remember one thing, the item that you're dragging in the filter shell should have less items. So if I would have taken city, there are over 25 cities. It would take very long to generate that report with individual pages. I'm not saying it would not make, it would make, but it would take very long. Hence, I was looking for something that had less pages. Let me go to the beverage data and show it to you one more time there. So beverage data sheet 4. Yes. So in beverage data, I have my products, main category, product subcategory, right? So here, as you can see, I have the product name, main category, that is beverage, and I have snacks, and under that I have the subdivisions. If I take the year in the filter shell, okay, under pivot table analyze, under pivot table name, you will first go and rename it if you want to. Otherwise, you can directly go to options and show report filter pages. Now there are 2 years of data, 2015 and 2016. Click on it. Click on OK. And here you can see the data for 2015 and you can see the data for 2016. You can see the data for 2015 and for 16. These are 2 new pages which have been generated as report filter pages. Please try this, everyone. Is it clear, everyone? Any questions? Can I go ahead? Can I go ahead, everyone? Any questions so far? Did everyone try generating report filter pages? Now, suppose I come on sum of revenue and I double click on it. What will happen? I will get a new sheet where I will get all the data which made up beverages. Can you see this? This data, however, will be in table format. Can you see table design here? So this will not be a pivot table, but it will be a table. Similarly, if I double click on apple juice, I will get all the data. I will get all of the data for apple juice. Just one moment. If I click over here on the sheet and I double click on apple juice, I will get all of the data that helped me to make up the concise or the consolidated value for apple juice. But yet again, this is also in table form. So if you want, suppose you've shared your pivot report with your stakeholders or your colleagues, and you would like to show them the back end or the internal working which has generated these kind of percentage based values or these summed values, you can always double click on the item from here. It will generate an individual page report and it will show you the data for the same. Is it clear, everyone? Yes, clear, everyone? Any questions so far? So in this manner, the pivot table is a very simple, easy to use tool. Okay. It is very understandable, and if you understand it in a structured manner, you can mold it based on the data that you have. In today's session, we worked on two data sets. One was the beverage data, which was spreading across 800 entries. The other data which we worked with was wider. It was 9,000 entries plus. However, the methodology of working, the tools, the mannerism of working was all the same. It was just the volume of data that we were working with, which was different. We still have a few more options with regard to pivot table. What we will be doing it, we will cover them in the next session because the time for the session is also over, and those are more complex in nature. So I would rather do them first thing with you when we do the next session, and then continue with the data cleaning aspect of pivot of Excel and take the session as it goes. If anyone has any questions or queries, let me know.